So I told him this story, and I'll tell you, sorry for the repeat story. My buddy's dad loves golfing. His one vice is plays golf trips by himself for whatever reason. So he went and teed off at this nice course in Vegas and hits his first shot. Some guy behind him was like, hey, do you want to pair up? Turns around, it's Jordan. So he's like, of course, would love to. So Jordan gets to the first tee box and he's like, so you want to gamble a little bit? And he goes, no way. I've heard all the stories, no chance. He goes, come on, man, just 10 a hole, have it fun, easy. He's like, fine, we'll play. So he ends up, my buddy's dad beats him by 8 strokes.
Wow.
They go have lunch. Jordan's like, let me go run out to the car, walks back in with a duffel bag of 80 grand. And he hands it to him, puts it down. He goes, dude, I thought we were playing for 10 bucks a hole, not 10 grand a hole. Well, it's a pleasure. Matt Baxter, and I'm originally from Ann Arbor, Michigan. I started a little landscaping and lawn care company when I was in middle school, high school, college. Had a chance to sell that, and I started what my business is today called Wedge. It's a video interviewing software platform, so I'm in HR tech. So typical career transition is you go from mowing lawns to software, and specifically HR software. As a fun side hustle, I started this podcast called The Matt Baxter Show. It's about purpose, passion, and calling. It's been kind of one of the most life-changing things in my life. I've gotten to meet some amazing people. And how I originally, or actually how I'm sitting at this table is because I sent a random LinkedIn message to Wade. I said, hey, can I grab coffee? He said, yeah. So I drove to Chicago. We hung out and got to know each other and become friends since. So I think that's kind of why I'm here.
Great. My version of that story too.
It was a creepy message. It's like, hey, do you want to get together?
Well, actually, so I was at LinkedIn and I was leading the sales team for LinkedIn Talent Solutions. At the time, it was like 2/3 of the revenue of the business. It was the primary business we had. And so HR tech introductions were very common. People who had good ideas would come to us from partnership. And that's, I responded to my messages a lot back then. And Matt's message was like, a guy who was just like this you could tell, like, young, excited entrepreneur who wanted to have coffee, seemed reasonable. And so I was at the point of like not
back alley or anything like that.
I didn't want to like go. I was, commuting. Even then I was sort of like not in the office every day. I'd travel a lot and we commuted. So I'm like, one coffee shop near my house would be fine. I didn't realize it was like 5 hours from where he lived.
It was a hike.
But then when we met and I realized he'd driven over from Michigan to have coffee, I'm like, okay, this guy's serious. Like, he's serious about his business, making a commitment to it. And I don't know, we just kind of connected in more about mindset even than about business at that point.
Yeah, I think we had a unique one, both kind of blue collar background. You come from farm, I had landscaping, lawn care, and then obviously jump into tech. So there's not that many people who've made that transition too. But I also think there's a broader picture behind just a job. I think there's the entrepreneurial conversation, the life conversation, and there's probably more to it than just making money that I think we've related on.
Well, here, let me just interrupt. You glossed over something that I think would be interesting, because you said you get a lot of LinkedIn messages about people who do similar stuff. But what specifically was it about Matt and his message that you responded to and were willing to have coffee with him? It
was direct and succinct. It wasn't some big, long, flowery intro to something and evasive. It was very direct about, I'm in this industry. I should actually look it up. Are you open to a cup of coffee? And I appreciate that. I can appreciate a very direct conversation with someone. He didn't pretend that we knew somebody in common. He didn't have some fluffy, check out this video link. It was just clear. I think most people are pretty receptive to a direct message.
I have, since you said yes to that, I've kind of always had the philosophy that I should say yes to similar people too, reaching out to me. But it's amazing how such crap is out there. Somebody is trying to pretend that they're not selling something, but they're selling something. I've had a lot of, hey, we know this similar person, and then I reach out to that person, they're like, I have no idea who that is. So, you run into a lot of that. And that's, I've tried to always be like, I'd love to meet. I have no idea what the outcome's going to be. I think it's going to be worth our time. Again, I don't know what for, but it's going to be, at least, if nothing else, a good conversation, not a waste of 30 minutes and a coffee.
Yeah. I could go through, if I open my LinkedIn app right now, there's probably 40 or 50 invites from the last couple of days. And I guarantee you several of them start with, LinkedIn suggested we connected. Who am I to argue?
I would love to add you to my professional network.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
thanks.
And hey, we have some similar interests. All this super generic stuff, it's not relevant. So think direct messaging. Also, the easiest person in the world to sell something to is a salesperson.
That's what we were saying last night.
Salespeople
we got
are the
upsold
most
on
sold.
every single thing on the menu. Every single thing they offered, we got upsold on.
Yeah.
Because we're salespeople.
And so there's a lot of that.
That's interesting. I think that's really good advice for people, because I know when I'm, in my business trying to reach out to people, it's this balance of what do I say and not come across too pushy or come across disingenuous, which I think often is a problem, or how to get people just to click, right? And react and engage.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to be like polite, I guess, but people who are evasive have something to hide, or they're ashamed of something, in my mind. And so if someone kind of is indirect about what they're trying to accomplish, I wonder why. Like, why is this person not being direct? And so to me, it's pretty easy. It's also easy to say no.
Yeah.
And so if someone's clearly, direct and they're secure with themselves, they say, I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it's a good use of our time. Two people who have a decent self-image can have that conversation much better than dancing around things and meeting 3 times to decide whether they should actually do business or not.
I have found that CEOs and founders almost always say yes to a meeting, and vice presidents always say no. It's this weird complex of I feel like people truly at the top are the ones who are like, no, I get it. I get the journey. I'm willing to chat. I'd like to know your intentions, but willing to at least say yes, even if it's hey, can't meet, but I'll take a 10-minute phone call. Whereas you have the VPs, you have all these that are like, no, we're too important for you. And it's probably because they've never been there. I've found that to be time and time again true.
Yeah. There's a story about, I think it was Eisenhower. There's a general, I know that they were in, it was, I think, trench warfare, but they were somewhere, and a private had, the general lit a match to light his cigarette or cigar, whatever he was smoking. And privates put out that damn match. And then he realized who it was. And he's backpedaling. He said, I'm really sorry, sir. He says, be glad I'm a general, not a sergeant.
So
that middle management is usually the most insecure.
It's so true.
Yeah.
I've also, the other thing too I've done, I get a lot of people who think I'm rich, and financial advisors will reach out because you have CEOs on your title. And every single time I'm like, hey, I already work with somebody. I'm happy to meet. If I can help you, great. If we can, but probably just not going to become a client. And you quickly vet out people who are like, no, I'd still love to meet and let's chat and get to know each other, who have intentions beyond, all I want to do is sell you one thing right on the spot right there. And it's like, or you get a lot of people who are like, man, I'm not going to waste my time. If it's like, okay, fair enough. That's cool. We can talk about other things outside of financial planning. But that I've learned, you can quickly vet people out who actually want to meet you versus they just want to sell to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially if they have their canned talk track.
Yeah.
When someone goes into presentation mode right away in a conversation, even if they're not actually presenting a deck or something, when they're in presentation mode, you're like, they just have this canned talk track and I'm disinterested.
Yeah.
Genuine people, I find, usually, first of all, they ask questions. And you tend to go...
not the what about you questions. I hate somebody asks a thoughtful question, the best they've got is, well, what about you? And it's like, no, come up with something original.
Yeah, because they're looking for the hook. And then there's other people like Matt and I where we can't finish a complete thought because we go off in all these different rabbit holes and never ends up anywhere tangible.
Yeah.
So there's definitely that as well. Need somebody who has, for example, legal background who could keep us on track with our thinking.
It'd actually be great if we found that.
Imagine. Yeah. Somebody that could do podcasts and keep them organized.
Video,
or something.
legal. I mean, if that gem out there existed, we should talk to him.
All right. Transition in. And I didn't even know where to transition to from that, but thank you for trying to include me.
Yeah,
that was the goal. All right.
Yeah. We're trying to derail you the whole time.
So both of you went you started a different industry, lawn care, you were doing construction, then you ended up doing these completely different things in tech. How would you describe that transition? What changed in you, or what did you say, I've had enough of this, I want something bigger and better in my life? Was there something specific, an incident that happened that propelled you in a different direction?
So mine, I think, was I got an offer to sell the business. I was living in Ann Arbor, and I went to Hope College, which is 2.5 hours away. And so I was going back and forth a ton. So it was honestly just a good life transition. All the family had moved over. So for me, it was good timing just to kind of part ways and sell the company. And it was fun to sell the business. And so then it wasn't that I was ready to sell the company and then start this. It was like there was a little bit of period of time, started thinking about the idea, started pursuing it, and then launched it. So there wasn't any massive aha moment of get out of this, get into this, but it was more had an opportunity to sell, good time to walk away, and then launch this next business.
But you had this idea, right, of HR tech. Where did that even come from? You had your experience in lawn care.
So in lawn care, when you hire people, resumes don't mean that much. In fact, in most jobs, resumes don't mean that much. So my whole thesis was, if I can put an employee in front of a customer, think about, we mowed a lot of older women's yards, right? And you've got big burly guys who might be intimidating, might be, whatever, show up with chew in their mouth, have tattoos all over, whatever it is. If I can trust that person or train that person to go talk to that customer, I could teach them how to mow a lawn. I could teach them how to spread mulch. I could teach them all those different things. It wasn't the actual job that was important. It was more how personal was that. And so it felt like that niche expanded far beyond just lawn care, landscaping, jobs like that. It felt like there was a much bigger audience for that. And so the idea came from, can we create a platform that allows for sort of better understanding of who the person is in the earliest stages of hiring, that allowed companies to kind of have that insight beyond just what a resume is. Because a resume is one single sheet of paper that, one, most people lie on, fake, fluff, whatever it is. But let's create an opportunity for people to actually like, hey, I get to know you in a quick snippet that I can share with my team. So that was the original idea.
So can we pull on that thread for a minute? Sure. Because that's one of the things that really attracted me to your idea from the start was, well, let me ask you this. Do you think in the same way you described lawn care is like you're really looking to hire the person and you can teach them the skill?
Yep.
You find the same thing in your company, like in tech jobs and sales jobs, marketing jobs?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're a company of anywhere between 15 to 20 people, and especially entrepreneurial company where there's no such thing as a job description. Now, there's jobs that need to get done, but multiple people can cross over on those jobs. It's not like one person's filling one role. So, I would say in our business for sure, we definitely hire people versus roles. Now, we're starting to get to the point where it's not less entrepreneurial, but it's more like building a structure of a company. We're in a weird transition of going from kind of throw darts at the wall and see what sticks to now like operationalizing what works well. And that takes, I think, a different hurdle. I think you have a lot more operations focus, methodical people versus whatever, we'll figure it out. So
so you get diffused.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think from the start, 5 years ago, whenever we first met, and I had a chance to, in some capacity, work with you, investor, advisor, whatever it is that we do.
Whatever we want to call it.
But I've also watched as the team grows. I don't know what each person does. I don't know. But anytime I'm around people on your team, they're motivated to be good at what they do. Like they're like, there's this aura of good energy, good work ethic, the right attitude. I don't know anything. I don't need to know like technically what they do, but that culture you've created somehow, I think, is about the seems to be from the outside looking in, is about the people and about the energy and about what we're trying to accomplish. I'm sure they have their tactical skills, or you wouldn't have a business. But it's interesting how you've kind of put together a group of people who think similarly.
Yeah, I'm probably just over the last 10 years reflecting of what being an entrepreneur is. I definitely am not. I'm like the worst micromanager. In fact, like I don't do any, like I probably need to be a little bit more involved in day-to-day of what people are doing. I treat people as if they were me, which is not always good because it's like, I don't need a whole lot of structure. I don't need to know what I'm waking up doing. I'll figure it out. And I think that's great when you're first getting going. But once you start to build, the organization, the structure of the team, that's a transition. Yeah. And that's why I've tried to, and made mistakes, plenty of mistakes on this, but I've tried to get ahead of that when it comes to like Theo, for example. I wanted to hire Theo to help build some of that structure because I know I will never be the structure guy. Yeah. So, and that's certainly a skill set I'd much rather hire out, partner out than try to create myself because
Well, I mean, most founders, any entrepreneur, I think, realizes pretty quickly what their strengths are and what they are not. Yeah. And they do. I had a chance to see this at some of the biggest companies out there, where very early on, founder realized they're not an operator. Yeah. And they'll bring in an operator and a great one, or they realize they're not. They're maybe just a product-focused person only. And you see that. I had a chance to see that with at LinkedIn. Reid Hoffman very quickly brought in CEO, and then brought in a different CEO, and clearly it worked really well. You see what Elon's done with Twitter. He finally brought in a CEO, and he realized his strength is maybe more around product. I don't know. But I think founders typically find that, like, what's my sweet spot? Hire everything else.
Do you prefer, so I know you have lived in both. You've been a part of large organizations, and you've also been entrepreneur yourself. When you wake up, and which do you default towards?
I used to think, like, once the company gets to a certain size, they behave a certain way, and therefore I don't want to be in this big, huge thing. And I still have a little bit of that. I'm not a real process guy. But I found that's not necessarily true. So, for example, when Microsoft bought LinkedIn, and my thought when we first had those conversations was like, wow, there's this big, huge monster organization with hundreds of thousands of employees, and I don't want to be a part of that. But I also looked at the way that Satya leads that organization and how empowered people are, even in this mammoth company, to be strong in what they do. So I don't necessarily think size of company is everything.
Yeah.
Because there are companies that have 5 people and they have, the owner's a micromanager. And so even though they're a small company, you have these ramps and rails that you just can't move.
Yep.
So I think it's more about the culture of empowerment. I like environments where people are empowered to be the best version of themselves and they're held accountable. Because for someone like me who has, definitely professional ADD, it's accountability is huge.
No personal either?
Probably just all over the board. Yeah. But it's accountability. Somebody who wants to win wants to be held accountable. Like nobody has a coach that they're like, this coach was so great because we never really had to do anything.
Yeah.
Like no one ever says that. So I look for empowerment to be creative and to get things done in a way that maybe that's best suited for you, but also the accountability to get there. So I don't know, there's this balance between the structure and freedom that's really important.
The accountability piece, I think, is one. I hold myself to a pretty high standard. I don't do a great job necessarily as a leader holding people to strict accountability that's beyond just numbers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have, hey, here's your quota, you got to go hit. But I think that's something I've learned. I think one of the hardest parts about leadership is truly how hard it is to hold people accountable. Now, you can build great systems in place, but at the end of the day, you're sitting across from somebody and it's your responsibility to do that. Yep. That's something I've definitely, I have a lot of improvement.
Well, I mean, maybe, because if you look at what really matters, I think most things actually don't have to be measured. And this is counterintuitive to a lot of people, but it's like when you're shipping a product, the MVP, like the minimum viable product, I lean on minimum. Mm-hmm. Like, what is the one thing that really matters? And from a leadership standpoint, most of the teams that I've led that are at any size are either sales or marketing or some go-to-market function. Using sales as an example, what really matters? Clearly integrity and honesty and that. But what really matters, there's a number. And I've always said, if you hit your number and you're standing on your head in the middle of Mexico City, I don't care.
Yeah.
That is the one thing that ultimately matters. The tactics and the way they do it. I'm thinking right now, there's a leader, a guy named Jim Duddy. He's one of the best recruiters of great sales talent that I know, enterprise sales talent. And the people that have worked with him and for him are all over the board as far as personalities and their styles and their methodology. You put them in one room, it's just chaos and fun. That's
awesome.
But he's, somebody who's figured out how to identify the essence of what makes a great enterprise salesperson.
Yep.
And then lets them be themselves. Now, somebody who likes a lot of structure and discipline and spreadsheets,
not going to work well.
They're probably not going to be on the same page. But the point is that matters. I also know people who are really structured in the way they run organizations. Right now, the chief revenue officer of Gong, a guy named Ryan Longfield, from the ground up, he's really a structured, disciplined, organized person, uses data to make intelligent decisions. And he also creates a high-performing organization. So very different people. Yep. But they can get the best out of them. And I can look through some people who are great salespeople, like a Dana King, who's one of the best salespeople ever, also a great leader. And there's others who were never really that great at the task, but they're good leaders.
How do you as an organization, if you're kind of designing that, not create a total conflict with other leaders in the organization? So if you think okay, that's revenue, go to market, marketing side, how do you then have a totally not conflicting product side, for example?
I find myself surprisingly in sort of a consulting business right now. And a lot of it is this conflict resolution with exec teams. Either founders. Yep. When you have more than one founder, you have more than one founder. And so anything in nature with multiple heads has some issues. And so I find a lot of this. Number one is shared vision. Yep. You have to come to that irrefutable common ground. What do we ultimately want to achieve? If you can't agree on what success looks like, what the vision is when we accomplish it, then somebody needs to go. Yeah. So number one, I think it's lying around the vision. And then how we're going to get there, the basics of that has to be, I think, sorted. Is this a go-to-market issue? Is this going to be M&A? Is this going to be organic sales? Are we going to expand our product line? Or are we going to expand geographically? Those tactics, I think, are really important. For example, if you believe you need to increase your feature set, and that's how you're going to expand, you're going to have a broader, a deeper portfolio of products or features. Yep. That's different than we have a good enough MVP and we're just going to market in a big way. Then that's basically a go-to-market approach versus a product approach. Are you going to have a sales team, or are you going to have product-led growth? Those fundamentals, I think you have to agree. What's the vision? What are the main tactics? And then who is best suited to accomplish it? Yeah. I think it only works when people aren't self-centered. Like, I may not be necessary for where the company needs next. I might not be the right person to take us there.
Yep.
That's really hard to do. But if you can get people who are that self-aware, that's how you can really win. Usually you're just dealing with insecurity.
Yeah.
Conflict between people is usually fear. Some kind of fear or insecurity.
Yep.
And then that's when you end up with these,
That, and I feel like unspoken expectations, I think, are one of the greatest forms of conflict. Of I have an expectation on you or vice versa, and I haven't vocalized that. So you're constantly going to be set up to be disappointed with somebody.
Yeah.
No matter what. And I think ultimately that falls on me having an expectation on you that I didn't vocalize.
I think that's true. I think it falls on you.
Yeah. I mean, completely my fault.
I think 100% of the time we have a conflict, it's on you.
I think every single time we get together and we fight about something, it's usually or always my fault.
Yeah, no. So, but, this is true in personal relationships too.
Yeah.
If I have an expectation of something, and my wife does something differently than the way I expected it, and I'm upset about it, that's on me.
Yeah.
I just assumed.
Totally.
And vice versa. And it turns out my wife and I are different.
Yeah.
Shockingly.
But I know for a fact your wife's never wrong, and it's.
Actually, there's a lot of truth to that. She's right more often than I am, for sure. But we will have an expectation. It's not even the thing that gets done; it's the way in which the other person does it.
Yeah.
And like I'm weird and all over the place, and so that you understand. But occasionally,
Don't rope me into that. That's part of that.
So my Y chromosome does have some influence in the way in which I make decisions. But I think once you learn to understand the other person, then over time, we've been married a bit. And over time, you start to say, 26 years.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And best decision I've ever made. Best natural decision I've ever made. I think that's one of the most important things in life is choosing who you spend your time with. Clearly, choosing a mate is very important, choosing a spouse, if people do that. But also in business and everything else, who you spend your time with. Like, I couldn't have made a better choice.
Yeah.
Andrea has to put up with a lot. Imagine. And I do just a little bit, but between the two of us, it's 100%.
Yeah.
It's just about 90-10 her. But I think that choice, that empowers me a lot because without her, not just love, but like grace, I couldn't be me, and hopefully vice versa. Well, if you move that into business, I think it's also true that like if you really respect somebody and you give them the grace to be themselves, you have so much more success.
Yeah.
Than if you want people to do things the way you do it. Well, this is how you should do this because this is how I do it.
Yeah.
You should think like I do. That's not only ineffective, but it frustrates both parties.
I can't believe I'm about to quote this, but I did listen to a Brene Brown, Tim Ferriss conversation. Mm-hmm. And one of the things she was talking about is in her marriage, it's never 50-50. It's always one day somebody's got 80, the other person's got 20, the other vice versa, and communicating that. And I'm not married, so I'm not going to act like I can understand that. But I think in business for sure, that's true with certainly different leaders on your team and communicating that like, hey, this is a tough season. We're going through a lot. Like, so we've raised a lot of capital, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And seasons of us going through raises, like I don't have the bandwidth to give to the business what it needs. Yeah. And so trying to find a way to keep everything afloat, right? And everything going well, giving people where they need attention. I think that's definitely something that like learning that balance is.
Yeah, I think it's really
You guys touched on two really interesting topics. One, having a partner, like an investor, and raising money, and how that relationship between investor and business owner and founder is a lot, I would assume, I would know, but it's a lot like a marriage. But how do you choose then your partner, your investor, and make sure that relationship is strong and that the investor understands what is needed of the founder and the founder understands what's needed of the investor? So
I can go a little bit into the raising money bit if we want to go down that path for a while, because I think I have a little bit of a non-traditional. We've raised like 6 million, 7 million. So not necessarily huge in the grand scheme of Silicon Valley, New York, but enough to be there. So the very first 50 grand check I got, I was at Hope and I got introduced to a wealthy alumni, Bill Van Fossen. And I get scheduled for a call and he picks up the phone. He's like, you got 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. First thing he said. And he was like, give me a minute long in your background. I'm at Hope, just graduated, or I'm still at Hope, just sold my lawn care. I've got another year and a half till I graduate. He's like, all right, cool. Tell me about your idea. You got 2 minutes. So I rolled through it. And he's like, all right, thanks. That's all I need. So then hung up the phone. It was kind of like, what the hell just happened? Mm-hmm. Like, I have no idea what just went on. So 2 or 3 days later, I get a couple of emails from him about like hiring and how challenging it is, whatever. And he's like, do you have time to chat? So a couple of days later, we hop on the phone and he's like, so I like this business idea. How do you plan on funding it? It's like, well, I made a little bit of money on my lawn care. He's like, that's not gonna be enough. He's like, let me invest. He's like, I'll write you a $50K check. That'll be the start. And he's like, I'll introduce you to some friends. So literally, like within 3 days, check came in. That's how we raised our first. Go ahead.
And that's all the diligence he did was just
that was it.
He didn't look at the numbers or
nothing. I didn't have a single investor look at the numbers for the first year and a half. Not that we didn't have them, but just the type of people who were interested in that didn't look at that. And I'd like to hear your side of the story on some of those things too. But we now over the last year have brought in some institutional capital, a couple funds, and then also family office. But the first probably 4 million was through 50 to 200K checks, all individuals. And the whole premise, and even today, it's, I believe in you. I believe in your ability to figure this business out, which is the greatest thing in the world and the worst thing in the world, because it's the coolest feeling when that happens. But it's also when things don't go well, it's also, that's on you. And that's something that I think I've struggled with in certain seasons is it's like the best feeling in the world to have people believe in you, but also it's like your responsibility when things go wrong, which I like that responsibility, but I think the fear of disappointment is where some of the imposter syndrome stuff kicks in. I think some of those different, so yeah, it's been a ride. You have another perspective to that side of the story too, but
it's not that dissimilar though. I think when you're investing in the first part of a relationship, personal, professional, whatever, but use it as an investor, number one is trust. Everything is trust. So if you don't have trust, if you can't establish some degree of trust or credibility, then it doesn't really matter what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think number two is in an early stage, you're investing in a person. Their initial idea, if they're going to move fast enough, their initial idea is probably garbage. You'll look back and you're like, I can't believe that was the original idea. You're kind of betting on that.
Yeah.
Because people who are so attached to that idea and they're unwilling to change, they're not going to succeed as an entrepreneur.
Yep.
The market's going to change, seasons are going to change, something's going to happen. You're really betting on the person. So I think a lot of it to me is, do I trust this person? Do I believe that they believe themselves? And do I think that they're agile enough to make changes? And are they resilient? Have they gone through, my grandfather always said, never trust a man without a limp. Like, have they gone through something in life? Yep. Somebody who's had it pretty easy their whole life and suddenly they're going to become wildly successful as an entrepreneur. Maybe.
Yeah.
I've never seen it. I'm sure it could probably happen.
Yep.
But probably doesn't. So I look for that. I look for that resilience. I look for work ethic, attitude, somebody who can take themselves a little bit lightly, because other people are going to laugh at you a lot. You might as well laugh at yourself.
Yeah. If you can't laugh at yourself, you should
and
punch yourself in the face.
The people who are like super rich and everything's perfect. I had this South by Southwest every year in Austin. I get a lot of pitches.
Yeah.
And I was in the lobby of this one hotel and several pitches in a row. One of the days this year. And only one stood out because it was two guys who were partners and they were just being themselves. And you could tell this is probably pitch number 20 for the day.
Yeah.
But they were very honest, I thought, about what they believed was to be true. And they also knew that some of that wasn't going to be true. They didn't know. They're like, we have all these blind spots, but we think we have this and we think we're on track with that. That was solid. Everyone else I heard, they had their canned pitch.
Everything was
everything was going to be perfect. Yep. And the charts are all up and to the right. Just exactly what you would
Here's our path
for.
to get 10% of the market. We'll do it in 3 days.
And they tell you about the TAM, the total addressable market. It's $700 billion addressable market. And all we need to do is get 5% of it. It's the same pitch over and over.
Yeah.
So I think it's that. I think it's like that initial bit. And I don't, to your point about like initial investor, it didn't take very long. Unpopular topic, but looking back, my wife and I, prior to getting married, I think we spent about 20 days together total.
I love that.
We met in September of one year. We were in two different states. She was Arizona, I was Nebraska. We met in Minnesota. New Year's Eve, I flew to Phoenix because I was living in Nebraska in December. So for our first date, New Year's Eve, and then we were engaged in March, married in April. But I had the MVP down. The basics, number one, is the vision of what we believed a marriage was, what we believed a family was, the things we believed in, the core essence of what we believed in. Like in a business, you have that common vision, that shared vision. And we had this shared alignment about value systems and ways in which decisions would be made. We knew that we'd have to figure it all out.
Yep.
And I'm not encouraging people to know somebody 20 days before they get married. But that being said, there are only a few basic things that matter a lot to you. And I think that's also true in business.
Yeah.
And, you know, the decks that are like 9 slides and then they have like a 64 slide appendix need an appendectomy. There's
So
just
true.
a little bit
Yep.
that matters, but that part that matters a lot.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, just like personal relationships, I don't know how many investors you turn down, but as far as investing, maybe invest in 1 out of 40 or 50.
You know, I think the people we've walked away from have been, one, it kind of goes back to the CEO versus the VP. Like you can tell the investors that have never done it. And I'm not saying that every investor, now, a lot of my investors are folks that we never were entrepreneurs, but we want to help support it because that's like a cool journey for them to go along too. Those are great people. And as well as founders themselves, they totally get it. They get the struggle, they get the highs and lows, they get all that. But it's often funds. It's not always true, but it's usually there's just some prick who you know that they're going to come in and you know they're going to run the business the way they want to. And it's not that it's not good and not successful. And I'm sure they have great track records, but it's like, those are the people that I just don't want to get in bed with because you actually are. I mean, it's a lifelong journey with them. So yeah, I don't know. We've had a lot of very fascinating investors. Some are very hands-on, some are very hands-off. But I can honestly say every single person on our cap table is pretty much, we believe in you, we trust you. At the end of the day, this is, you know, your call, your decision, and we'll be there to support you. And it's such a cool group.
Yeah, if people can get, it comes back to like, who do you want to spend your time with?
Yeah.
And that is another way of how you're spending your time and resources with. But, you know, one time I came into a company, a CEO of a company, the cap table is 62 long, 62 people who mostly just invested a little bit of money a long time ago, knew nothing about the industry, but yet all had opinions. And that was convenient. You know, and I think that's like probably what you don't want.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there's also kind of the golden rule, the one with the gold rules. So when you have like one investor only, then you're also really beholden to that one
So true.
person or that one entity. And I think, you know, being able to diversify that is really important. It's as, if not more important than the employees you hire.
Well, I also think I have asked this time and time again. I don't know if I've asked this for every person, but first thing is like, are you okay losing this money? Because if you're not, I don't want it.
Yep.
I hope I hand you a lot bigger of a check back, but if you're not okay losing this money, this is already a bad relationship to begin with.
Yep.
And then, you know, I think founders, and this is, I would go back and ask this more, who do you want to disappoint? Meaning at some point things are not going to go well. Something's going to go wrong. Something's going to happen. It could be a lot, could be little, but who do you want to sit across from the table and say, hey, I screwed up. This went wrong. This missed expectations, and you're gonna ultimately build a relationship with that person. It could be a really good one, a really bad one, and that's one I've realized. Like I have a great group of people I can bring good, and part of it's founders working through the courage to bring bad news because a lot of times, like with our board meetings, I want to share stuff that I need help with, not get you head nodding. 8 guys, 8 girls in a room, head nodding doesn't help anything, but actually saying, hey, this is stuff that we need to work through. And I have learned that through the journey is I could have brought bad news together sooner opposed to like more reactionary, just out of fear of like, hey, I don't want to disappoint people. I want to make sure we look good, not for my own self-image, but for the business's image. And so that's something like, I think when picking an investor, having somebody that you know that you can bring tough news, good, bad, ugly, and they're going to be there like, all right, what's next? And I think that's a huge piece.
I think have the courage to bring bad news is important also with employees, with anyone else. Like if you come to
in marriages too.
In marriages, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, but if you come to a board meeting and there's a surprise, you're not a good leader.
Yeah.
If you go to a performance review with someone and they're surprised by how you feel about how they're doing, you're a bad leader.
Yeah.
You know, those should be happening all the time. Like I'll get a message from you, you'll call and say, hey, I have this thing we should talk about. It's not a board meeting. It's not any of that. It's like there's something that needs to be addressed in the moment. You're not going to wait 90 days to say, well, we have this meeting coming up.
Yeah.
In the same way, if like, you know, relating it to a marriage, if I'm like, you know, there's this thing that my wife did or said that I'm not comfortable with. So New Year's Eve, we like to review the year. I'm going to put that on the list. You know, that's a pretty ineffective way of managing a relationship. But people do that professionally for some reason. Yeah. And I think bringing it forward, also good news though. Like it's good to bring good news forward. And sometimes people hesitate to celebrate.
Yep.
But it's when you see, for me, also, if you see founders or especially just hired management teams start to optimize for the investor, it's time to get out. When they lose the customer, when they lose sight of, in order to do this for the customer, that's where I want to put more money in. That's where I want to back somebody up. If it's like, we need to do this because of in order to fulfill the vision of what we're trying to accomplish and delighting the customer. When the focus is there, I'm willing to continue investing if the unit economics work. When the focus is about ROI and about the return back to investors and the timing of it, and we need to exit now because of this, I'm out.
Yeah.
Because that tells you where their focus is. It's selfish, it's introverted, customer loses.
Yep.
And I think having that focus on the customer it's worth investing longer if that's where the focus is.
Yeah. I think that's why Elon's so good. He obsesses over the customer.
Yeah. I mean, best companies out there. You look at Amazon, one of the largest companies on the planet with this maniacal focus on customers in so many different categories.
Yeah. Bezos kind of laughs. He's like, yeah, we might miss quarterly reports, whatever. Onward. Let's focus on the customer.
But absent them, who would have thought you can go order something and get it to your house the same day?
Yeah.
This dates me, but I remember ordering from catalogs where it was 4 to 6 weeks for delivery. You're older by the time that thing shows up.
You forgot what you just ordered.
But even there's still a lot of places where you order it and you maybe get it in a week.
Yeah. And somehow that's disappointing.
Yeah, and it's like a week. Jeez, I can wait for that. Seriously, I can't get it same day.
Yeah.
When the drone's coming, but because of that focus on the customer, it's gone faster and faster. And of course they have a downside too. Every company has downsides, but that's where I think things become great, is when you focus on the customer.
So a little bit of a spin on the investor investee relationship. We talked about this, like the knowing when to hold them, knowing when to fold them. How have you gone about, both in your life and also you've invested in other companies and been mentors to a lot of leaders? How have you seen it sort of stepping away? You have this great parable of, this is my baby, this is my business, this is everything to me. And you want that drive out of an entrepreneur, and I feel that, but at the same time, sometimes things don't work, markets change, everything. How there's a lot of more than just one question there, but how have you kind of seen that done well, done poorly?
As usual, I'll just answer the question I want to answer.
Yeah, perfect.
I mean, look, no matter how diligent someone is trying to be as a parent, if the children are malnourished, they're not a good parent, And the same is true with founders or with leaders of companies. It's look at how is it thriving or not?
Yeah.
And if the business isn't thriving, I don't care how much I love that person. It's they're not succeeding.
Yeah.
I've done that. I've been in jobs I shouldn't have been in. Maybe all of them. I don't know. But and there's also some point. There's the S curve, where there's this early stage and then it starts growing and then it takes off and there's a plateau. And often it's a different leader required to go to the next S curve. But mostly I look at, is the company thriving or not? That's the first thing. If they're thriving, I probably want to stay on that ride. Maybe. Depends on a portfolio of other choices in life. Yeah. But you also just can't, if you diffuse your energy too much, you're not good at anything. And so I think to me, if I'm actively involved, especially in too many different businesses, there's a point where you're not good at any of them.
Yeah.
Jack of all trades, master of none. I look at a couple of things. One is performance of the business. Number two, is that person thriving or not? If someone's investing in themselves, or that team of people, if you start to see a bunch of infighting and you start to see things that culturally are not good, it's really hard to turn a culture around. Yeah. Very rare. When a culture starts to get a little bit toxic, even if they're brilliant people, probably especially if they're brilliant people, I get concerned that if there's one sort of negative influencer, if they're not removed, then I'm out. Yep. But it also, when they start to lose their passion, you can see when someone gives up on themselves. You can see when they're mailing it in, when they're kind of coasting, when they're sort of done. Right now I'm talking to a lot of companies that are not anything to do with tech or my background, so I've been looking at companies that are selling. So post-COVID, there are a ton of family-owned businesses. There are a bunch of service-oriented businesses, home services, professional services. And the people who founded these are maybe in their 60s, 70s, something like that. They don't have a next generation coming on to buy the business. Yep. So there's a bunch of businesses for sale on the cheap right now. And they're cheap for a reason, because they're not worth a lot with that person gone. Yep. But I start to look at the one who still has a lot of passion for that business, and they love it and they want it to thrive. And I see the other one who just wants to cash out. Yep. And there's so many of the latter. So I think a lot of it too is does the person who's primarily behind the company, is she or he still really active and excited about it? When they lose that passion,
Forget about
everything's going to follow.
Yeah.
Because everything rises and falls on leadership, in my opinion. And that leader's got to have the juice. And if they're fired up, they don't even have to be as excited about the business, but if something in their life has them going, if you look at somebody, I was talking to somebody recently that's doing a triathlon this week.
I was about to say, that's why I'm doing the run.
Yeah, and you're doing this run you were talking about. It's insane. When someone has that thing they're pushing for, like this person doing a try, has never done one, and he inspired me just telling me about it.
Yeah.
And I work with him in banking. He's an awesome dude. But when I see somebody has that, not every aspect of your life is going to be exciting all the time. But if you have something that you're passionate about, you're driven, I'll do that. But if I see somebody who's kind of just coasting, I mean, I've met people who are like 30 and they're dead. They just haven't notified their body yet. They're not buried until age 70. They just give up and they shrink their dreams down around their current reality. And to me, that's another indicator of somebody I'm probably not going to spend much time with.
Yeah.
I want the person who their current reality is here and their dreams are like here.
Yep.
And they're pushing, they're striving, and they're trying to, get there. That's the person that'll find their way out of the mud.
You brought up a point around investing in like kind of a portfolio of investments. And one thing that this is kind of going back as somebody who's pitched a lot of investors, been told no thousands of times. I think early on founders who've never raised money before, they get offended by somebody saying no. And yes, it's them saying no, but you got to think about, it's not them just saying no to your idea. It's, we have an allocated amount of time, resources, capital, whatever, that we might be putting it somewhere else that's more important, more fitting to our thesis. And I think, again, kind of off the rails a little bit, but I think that's one advice that I would give to people who are raising money is like, one, can't take it personally. Secondly, it's oftentimes not that they don't like the business. It's just that at the time they might be putting money, so right now, a year and a half, 2 years ago, I could make 3 phone calls and raise money like that. Now it's a lot different because everybody's having issues with capital, and it has nothing to do with necessarily our business, but it's more to do with the fact that, hey, you've got places you need to put money, you need to allocate. And so I think, founders need to not take things too personal on that stuff.
I mean, the getting told no is something too that's fascinating to me because this is why sales, a lot of times people have a tough time in sales. And if you look at product-led growth or marketing type of business versus sales, if you're in marketing and you're doing various things to convert a customer from interest to intent to purchase, you don't see them say no. You only see the yeses. You see the ones that come through. Feels pretty good. If you're in sales, and so let's say you have like a 3% conversion rate. Some marketing campaign and 3% actually come through and buy. You failed 97 times, but you never felt it. If you're in sales and you go out and you go out 10 times and you fail 7, you feel every one of those 7 people say no to you.
Yeah.
But I think,
and the 3 are probably just reliefs, just like,
and you're like, oh,
finally.
And I think we see this wrong. We see like probably the people, we talked about that earlier. I think the probably the most iterative function out there or role in society maybe as a stand-up comic, because they immediately can tell whether what they said worked or didn't work.
Yep.
And I'm sure that they feel, I've never been one, but I'm sure that like you feel like, like I thought that was going to be good. It didn't go. And then you also feel the energy and so they iterate so quickly that the good ones, they've been out there time and time and time again. And I've heard some of these people out there talking about, like Joe Rogan has a lot of comedians on his podcast, and they'll talk about, they're trying new material out all the time. And these people who are great or find themselves bombing some percentage of the time to see if their material works or not. You'd think they'd know by now, but they don't. And this is where I think in business, like, you've got to be willing to get out there and fail some. If you're not failing and getting told no, you're not doing anything. You're not doing anything worthwhile. Like you're not pushing it hard enough.
I agree.
So part of the self-image thing too is like,
you just got to get over it. I mean, I have cared so much about what people think for so long, and then you finally get to a point where you're like, I mean, I don't think there's an element of not caring at all. Like there's a certain level of like, you have a standard that I want to follow as a person, right? That I'm going to hold you to, you're going to hold me to. So there's, in some regards, like, I do care, but you got to get to a point where like, you can't take anything offensively. I mean, it's not always about you. And I think you kind of need to get over some of that. Yeah.
I have a mentor that really helped me a lot with this too. Like I'm in a business where I'm getting 5 or 6 more people actively involved in what I'm doing. And I'm looking for 5, maybe 6. And so as I'm talking to people, I'm just as interested in them not being the right person as them being one.
Yep.
So if they're not one of those 5 or 6 people, they're not one of the 5 or 6. Someone else is going to be. And so I really don't care. Like if somebody starts to push back and we're talking about it, doesn't feel like it's the right thing, like I kind of forget the conversation before the door closes.
Yeah.
I don't mean that rudely. I just mean, clearly that's not the right fit. We're not going to work together. And you and I talked about this earlier. The last thing I want to do is try and get a group of people together and then try and motivate them.
Yeah.
Like that's a waste of energy.
Yep.
I want a group of motivated people. And people who are wanting to do something, you collect that group. When you finally get that group together, it's just like if you're interviewing candidates for jobs and you don't end up hiring that person. As the hiring manager, you shouldn't feel like a failure.
No.
You like chose not to hire them or they chose not to take it.
Yep.
I think the same is true in sales, same is true in raising money.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to be chasing money. I mean, there's certain groups that you're like, I know there's a fit, things like that, but you really don't want to be chasing investors or trying to convince them. If they don't believe in it, they might write you a check, and that's the money that you don't really want to take because you're now chasing approval, you're now chasing results that you really shouldn't be, you're now making decisions that you really shouldn't be, opposed to, hey, this person believes in me, I'm now motivated by that because they believed in me and wrote a check.
Yeah. Well, some of that's posture too.
Yeah.
Like who's going to be in control? You can let them win or you. Like they should, like at some point they're going to regret not writing me a check.
Yeah.
Like this.
Yep.
Like you should know that.
Yep.
And so it's like, oh man, it sucks to be them because they weren't smart enough to invest in this business. Not my problem.
Yep.
I'm not there to build their intellect. They chose not to invest in me. How foolish of them. I don't mean that arrogantly, but you do have to have a little swagger. Like you have to believe that this is the best. When you're doing a good deal, both parties should feel like they're getting a better deal.
Yeah, of course.
And if I write a check to somebody, hopefully every time I've invested in your company, I feel like I kind of got to win on this one.
Yep.
And hopefully you're like, oh man, like I pulled one over on him. No, but like both should feel like they're getting a good deal.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you have an imbalance in the relationship, and that long term is going to be a problem.
So how do you, if you're in a circumstance where you're kind of constantly needing to chase, how do you change that? How do you make that shift?
Make more money.
Yeah, that helps.
I mean, like it's the reality is like most people don't raise enough capital.
Yeah.
And so they're always raising capital.
Yep.
And it's the same thing in people's personal life. Like, well, I have this and that being stressful. I mean, okay, if you put 12 months of your cost of living in the bank, how would your day-to-day decisions change? You wouldn't be worried about exactly what this costs, exactly what that costs. You already know the next 12 months I'm good.
Yep.
Most people in business, they maybe have an 18 to 24 month runway if they're lucky. Mm-hmm. They know their current burn rate and they're measuring it. And one is be profitable.
That helps.
Like I think right now, and especially, venture capital doors kind of locked up about a year ago.
Yeah.
And things changed a lot and people see that as negative. I think it's fantastic.
No, it's finally people are like not outrageous burns, not outrageous, just dump money. It's like, hey, let's go build a business that actually makes money and serves customers. Oh.
Yeah. I mean, this is sixth grade math,
idea.
right?
Yeah.
If you can balance a checkbook, which if you can't balance a checkbook by the time you're in sixth grade, and if your kids can't teach your kids how to balance a checkbook, it's math.
Yeah.
It's the same thing in business. Like bring down the cost, bring up the income. If your outgo exceeds your income, your up keeps your downfall.
Yep.
So I think like being cash flow positive, even if it's painful, I think it's really important. And Aaron and I have a mutual connection, and we were talking about a year ago about some of the things that he was doing. He said, find a way to get cash flow positive. And it's like it takes the stress off, even if it doesn't build your ego as much. It takes the stress off, and then you're not chasing the dollar all the time.
We definitely made that mistake of we took on a round of capital, hired a bunch of people. Mm-hmm. It was all good intentions, all good plans, and ramped. And then it was like, we're burning that much money a month? Mm-hmm. And it's like, wait a minute, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then markets change, and it required us to raise more capital. So we needed to make adjustments. Mm-hmm. So we've kind of done the same exact thing around get a little bit leaner, get a little bit tighter, go make money, and it's better to have more money coming in the door than out the door.
Well, and it's so easy to spend money when you think you have plenty. Mm-hmm. And in a business,
and you think you can go get it easily too.
Oh, you can get money easily, no big deal. Or you assume that a tree grows all the way to the sky. It doesn't actually work that way. So revenue is doing this, and you take on employees, and it's easy to take employees on. It's harder to offboard. So when you find yourself in a position where you have to do layoffs, it's terrible.
Yeah.
And it happened probably because of undisciplined decision making earlier. Sometimes it's not the direct fault of the business, but we all do it. We all take on overhead in our personal life and our business life. Wasn't really necessary.
Yep.
Seemed like a good idea at the time.
Yep.
And then pretty soon, it's like, go look at your subscriptions on Apple or Google or whatever you use. You look at all the subscriptions, you're like, some of them you don't even remember you started
taking on.
Why did I
make that decision?
Yeah, like, I'm paying $900 a month for these things that I don't use.
Yeah.
Or whatever the numbers are, like some ridiculous number. The same happens in business.
So true. So true. And also, I don't know if this is a mistake or not, but I'd be curious your take on this. I have found that if you have a problem, don't throw a person at it. Like we have created issues, or we've had issues in the business that need to be resolved. Some good. Hey, it's growth. Hey, it's whatever. I don't think immediately throwing a person to try to solve that and be like, hey, we need to go to market better. We need to, grow something XYZ, and just saying this person's going to fix that problem. I have too high of expectations on some people, and I think probably didn't lay those expectations out clearly enough. I also don't know if it's the best solution to fixing big issues like that.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. So whenever you have a problem, don't throw a person at it. But if you have a person, you can throw a problem at them.
Yeah.
No, I hadn't thought about it that way.
So. Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's true or not true. No, that's interesting too. And actually, for sure, with the bigger parts of business, sometimes you put the wrong skill set toward a problem.
Yeah.
And this is where I think businesses working in silos create some problems. If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so if you're a product person and you see an issue and you're going to try and solve it with product, if you're in sales, you're probably going to solve it with sales.
Yeah.
And I think if you get a team together and you say, we have this issue, how is this best solved? It might be a finance thing. Mm-hmm. Might be an HR thing. You're like, maybe it's solved with a different function than what you're thinking.
So, Patrick and Theo, and we've had this debate. I have no problem sharing this. Mm-hmm. So Patrick is this is our CTO. He's a very much a product driven person. Everything should be product forward. Theo's a sales guy. Everything should be sales forward, right? So it's this amazing clash of, we can solve all of our problems if we just get more revenue. That's true. Mm-hmm. We can solve all of our problems if our product works well. Also true. Watching that conflict happen is one of the most entertaining debates and now they know each other well enough to know kind of where they come from. But watching people who kind of view the world, it's the best. I think leadership gets really hard when you have two really smart people who are both right and are convinced the other person's wrong. Mm-hmm. And you sit there and you watch that and you're like, this is going to be interesting how this pans out.
Yeah, one thing you have two leaders there who are secure enough that they want what's right, not who's right, ultimately.
Yeah.
And hopefully they go right to the edge.
Yeah.
Right before one of them taps out.
Oh, yeah.
But it's what's right, not who's right. I like healthy conflict with people who respect each other.
Completely.
Like when you can come to that, and you see that, I see that with families, and this might be, I have 3 older brothers and a younger sister, so we were definitely, I don't know if it's healthy. We have a lot of conflict.
You were thrown into conflict.
Yeah, I'm familiar with conflict. But the idea is like you learn how to debate an issue from all sides of the issue and understand it better, and sometimes realize you were wrong. Now, you never admit that with siblings, so that's a different issue.
Yep.
But realizing that I might not have been looking at this right. And when you create a culture that it's okay to be wrong, like, you know what? I think you're right. I think you have a better view on this than I do. And if you can do that without getting trashed, then you create a really nice environment. But that's one thing I think you do have, is you have a sales perspective and a product perspective. They're very different and hopefully create good, healthy conflict.
Yeah.
But they're also smart enough to want the business to win, not themselves.
Yeah. Seeing, I think you said it right, confident people who, not that they don't have egos, because I actually think a little bit of ego is a good thing, but confidence that allows themselves to say, oh, I don't need to be right in this. I care what's best for the business. I'm going to present my case, my approach. That's why I'm here. And I'm able to hear yours. I think it's very obvious. I've learned more and more and more. It's very obviously when somebody has a point they're trying to make and they're not listening to you at all. They might sell themselves as listening, but they haven't thought about it from the other side. I think that becomes pretty obvious.
Yeah, well, I think debate teams, right? You're required to take both sides of an argument,
which I think is great.
You're required to argue the other side, which is really healthy too.
Yeah,
and sometimes you can even facilitate that in a discussion. You'd say, well, how would the other point of view, like how would someone else think about this? And you can get someone to start to bring that forward and see if they can think about it the other way.
I'm not the best at this, but I'm definitely working on it. When I know that I'm like irrationally upset about something, and it's somebody who I trust and care about. Usually it's because I'm not seeing it right. Now I'm irrationally upset for some reason, some shape or form. But I think it's really healthy to take a step back and be like, that person did something that made me that upset or that faulted or whatever it is, probably for a reason that I'm not seeing all the details behind. And I think definitely in like leadership teams like that, being able to see like, oh, Patrick or Theo or I did something that was totally out there, right?
Yeah.
There's probably more to the story than just them being totally irrational. And so, I don't know. I've worked on that.
Well, and I think that's compounded with distributed workforces.
Yeah.
Where, the last 15 years, I've kind of been like in different places of the world distributed. But when you're consistently face to face, there also is some more degree of trust and respect and less tension from things like text.
Yeah.
Number one rule when there's conflict, back away from the keyboard.
Don't text right
Nothing good happens from here forward.
Nothing, yeah.
It's good marriage advice too, by the way.
It is good. Back away from the keyboard.
Yeah.
I'm going to filter my comments on that. But no, that's true. But like when you're not in the same, like pick up the phone.
Yeah.
Or meet in person. Like there's just some things where, like you said, actually, in personal relationships, like in a marriage, just sitting down and saying, I'm not sure how we're so far apart on this, or whatever the topic is, it starts to diffuse the issue immediately. And you can do the same thing in business, usually. Not always, but typically you can diffuse things if you get the emotion out of it.
So I also find that so if I did something that I messed up and I wronged you, most people would rather, I'm going to send you a text and wait for your feedback by text. I think if you're the person who's been faulted, it's better to actually hear the wrongness that you've done in person. Because I think people are not softer about the way that they, like, I'll give you a prime example. We have a investment group, and there was an expectation that we set and we missed it. And I was expecting a very long email that was going to be, pretty attacking. I went and sat with those guys in person, and we had they gave me some harsh feedback, but it was good. But I think you, one, build stronger relationships that way. I think two, people respect people who can actually take harsh feedback. And I think I don't know. I think there's a lot to hearing kind of difficult conversations in person, not just, I want to avoid the conflict, but I think specifically, like if you know you've wronged somebody or you've messed up, whatever, go hear that feedback in person. Yep. And I think you'll get a lot better. And I think you'll also build a stronger relationship too.
I guess really solid advice. And they also listen to understand, don't listen to respond.
So true.
And especially when you don't agree.
So on my podcast, I have gone back and listened occasionally. And when I start saying, "Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome," that's when I know I'm not listening. I'm just like, let's move on to the topic.
Most people are sitting there waiting for their turn to say what they want to say.
Yeah. I've
found this where, not just with conflict, just even understanding, like, to broaden the horizon of the people you can influence or lead or inspire, I think you have to get outside of yourself, because we already know how we think. I know how I think. So how can I work with someone who's socialized in a very different way than I would? They may grew up in a different country or in a different culture, or, I tend to be pretty extroverted, middle-aged, straight white American male, right? Well, there's a lot of categories outside of that I don't relate to socialization-wise. And so sitting down with employee resource groups or just with individuals and saying, give me your perspective on like what matters here. And how do you view that? And tell me more about it. Yeah. I don't have to agree with them. I can completely disagree with someone and say, so when I do or say this, how do you feel?
Yeah.
And what do you think causes that? Like, how would you do it differently? That's not, even if you have conflict with someone, if you disagree with it, it's still helpful to know, like, where are they coming from? Because I think most people, if you really get down to it and you understand why they're wired the way they are, you may not agree with them, but you understand it.
You can rationalize it. Yeah.
It's just like politics, like politics can be so divisive, especially on social media, and you're throwing memes at each other, and you get these camps and these cults of this group and that group. And if this group says it is wrong, it's like, well, maybe it's actually right. You just didn't like the voice. And no one's willing to do that. But if you're willing to just understand, like, why do you feel this way and how do you think this way? And just shut up and listen. By the time they talk through it, you still may completely disagree on the topic, but you can understand the person.
Yeah.
And you're like, I can see how you feel that. Like, if I were you, I would probably come from that. So at least you can respect the human.
Yeah.
And like respectfully disagreeing is part of what makes great society. But disagreeing means I can dislike you and I can dislike the topic, and I'm willing to listen.
Yeah.
Like, that's hard.
Rocky Howard on our board?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's black female. So we come from different worlds, right? She is my favorite person, where I'm like, look, there's a lot about this world that I don't understand, and I'm going to ask you, but I want to ask. And I think it was when the George Floyd, that all happened. I called her. I'm like, there's a lot of things I don't understand about this. Can I ask kind of unfiltered questions? And she so appreciated the fact that she's like, hey, maybe you shouldn't say that. Just learned a lot. But I think you need people in your life who sees the world so differently, but you have enough of a respect to say, I'm going to ask something and I don't have any ill intentions about it. Yeah. Might come across wrong. But I also think like there's maturity in giving people the benefit of the doubt, that most people don't mean to be necessarily offensive. Most people don't mean to be ill intentions. But I think finding people in your life that you can have enough respect to say, I know that was totally out there and you probably shouldn't have said that, but I respect you enough to know that maybe we should have a conversation about that. And she's been an amazing person, at least in some of those conversations for me.
This is a great example of that. And I think there's, we can only barely control ourselves. We can't control anyone else.
Say, that's stretchy.
And so,
for me.
yeah, I mean, I don't know that we even can, but we can better understand. We think we can understand ourselves pretty well. I'm not sure if that's even true, but I think the idea that being able to listen to other people and be able to at least empathize with where they're coming from helps a lot. And then we're so unconscious in the way we do things. So, for example, when I first started leading teams outside of the U.S., I started to realize from feedback, I asked for feedback a lot, how many times I use sports metaphors, for example. And American sports metaphors. It didn't mean anything to people I was talking to. First of all,
just gonna block and tackle. Just block and tackle.
Yeah, block and tackle. You were just at the 1 yard line. You really hit that one out of the park. Like all this stuff that just makes no sense to anyone. First of all, turns out not everyone's into sports.
Yeah, really.
It's insane. I don't get it. Like whatever. But no, and also American sports analogies. And from a certain era, you talk to people who are really into like movies and TV shows, or whatever era they're from, they're quoting these things, and you'll be like, no idea what you're talking about.
Yep.
All of those things we don't realize them, but they're selfish. They're us speaking to ourselves in terms we understand. And I think like the best communicators out there kind of communicate at sort of a 8th grade or grade 9 level communication so that everyone can understand, sort of put the cookies on the lower shelf,
Yeah.
And they make it easy. People who are trying to sound sophisticated or smart or really intelligent, they lose a lot of people because they're trying to be like experts and trying to be seen as something better.
I hate to say it, but How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's cliche, but it is such a good book because so much of it's related to the other person, not you, right? And some of it's slightly manipulative, but it's, I think, in a good way. Use people's names. Yep. There's a bit of mirror image. There's talk at the pace they're talking, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of things you can do that
is, to me, that's a fundamental book for anybody listening to people in anything related to people. How to win friends and influence people. It's been
just like how to be likable.
Yeah, and how to bring the other person out of themselves.
Yeah.
I think that's been converted or translated into 120 languages, something like that.
Yeah.
And there's another one that isn't as popular, but it's called The Magic of Thinking Big by a guy named David Schwartz. Same era, like way back in, 100 years ago or something. But it's really just about, you can choose to see things larger than you're seeing it, and you probably have a better perspective on it. But there's a lot of those just fundamental things that I think can go a long ways. Invest in yourself.
Yeah.
Not that hard.
No, it's not that difficult, believe it or not.
Okay. Everyone's looking at me now. I have to move the conversation.
Yeah, that's what we do. Yeah.
But you mentioned something earlier about you personally, that you're running this run, right?
Yeah.
You're running across the Baja Peninsula.
Yeah.
Why the heck would you waste your time with that? Anyway, I'm being silly, but that is something you've decided to take on, right? You're not a runner.
No, we gave that away. So moderation is something I'm not very good at. So to me, we were talking about this, like I have so much respect for the runners who run every day, go do half marathons, 5Ks, 10, whatever. That's great. That is not exciting to me. And there's nothing motivating about that. So I played college lacrosse for a year. So I grew up as an athlete. I think I'd never run more than 3 miles, and kind of through a random happenstance, did a marathon on a treadmill with no training. And I was actually, I think I'd had a little wine and beer, a little wine and pizza the night before. So it's just like, to me, it was just the mental challenge of going through something like that. So there's a pastor, actually here in Chicago, that I'm friends with. I'm on this youth force board with, and he's a runner. He's done 48 marathons in 48 states. He's done crazy stuff. And I was kind of like, all right, if this guy can do it, he's not like, when you look at him, you wouldn't picture the guy who's done these things. I'm like, all right, I can do that. So I'm doing it for a charity. It's Baja Traverse. It's 100 miles, and it's like 94 in 3 days. Day one's like 46. Day 2, I think, is 26 or 28, but it's up 6,000 feet, down 6,000 feet. And then day 3 is like 18. And so for me, it's just the insanity of a mental challenge like that. Like, I just need something in my life that I think gets me motivated and excited. I think there's health reasons, and then also, like, it's cool. It's a really cool cause. So I'm on this board. It's called the Global Youth Force, and it's designed around inspiring leaders, young leaders around the world. And so, yeah, it's kind of one of those.
When is that scheduled for?
February 3rd through the 5th. And I think my dad's going to ride an ATV alongside and do a little drone footage and film it. So it'll be fun. That's
amazing. Good luck.
Yeah, I think we're the first Americans to do it. I think last year there was 10 folks from Mexico that did it. And I think we're the first. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure we are. So
wow,
it'd be cool.
Yeah,
I think
awesome.
Wade might do it.
Yeah, Wade. Any cross country runs or
Matt's trying to talk me into doing this one. Yeah, and I don't know. He started pitching me on it, and Seems like a good idea. I don't know. It sounds like a terrible idea. But it
Seems like-
sounds like an
there's
inspiring
nothing-
thing.
famous last words.
So
Seems
the
like a
only
good
so
idea.
that like the mental piece, I'm not super worried about. I like am psycho enough that if it's something I want to do, I'm probably going to do it. The physical training, I just need to be there. But the thing I'm worried about is like blisters. Like there's like I know that sounds like so weenie, but like it's literally like that piece or some you tear a calf muscle, something that like you can't really train for. That just kind of that's the only piece I'm like that's what's gonna suck. And I know something like that's gonna.
Yeah,
happen.
you say you have the mental fortitude, but when it's mixed in with physical pain,
Yeah.
you really test your mental fortitude.
Yeah.
See if you can
When you're in the
muscle
middle
through
of nowhere on a trail with people that you don't really want to talk to for 18 straight hours, not in a bad way, but it's like after a while you're like, all right, there's not that much to talk about. But I don't know.
The thing that I like about this, though, is I share the need for something extreme to focus on.
Yeah.
Because I don't do well in the mundane, like the day-to-day. Like I don't idle well.
Yeah.
And fitness-wise, one of the problems that I run into is not having that next thing. Because so as somebody who was like a competitive athlete growing up, and
You
know,
wrestled in college, right?
Yeah, I wrestled at University of Nebraska and had,
Yeah.
had a brother at Northwestern. I have 3 sons who are competitive wrestlers, and so. But you don't just kind of like walk down the street and find a wrestling match, So not doing that competitively, although I could. But anyway, not doing that. And then running, like if I have something to shoot for, and I haven't really. It's easy enough to justify whatever you want to justify, but I haven't done a marathon. I haven't had any of those things that I set goals out to do, and so the idea of having something that is both inspiring, but also just gives you the discipline. It's sort of like life. It's actually the dream is what gives you the discipline to discipline your flesh to do the things to accomplish the thing.
Yeah.
It's, what's that quote? A guy named Bill Britt used to put this on his plaques when people hit a level in his business. He said that, it's a quote from somebody that man's greatest reward for his dedication to excellence is not what he gets from it, but who he becomes through it. Words to that effect.
And that's part of the reason why like I need something like this in my life to form. Like I'm not a disciplined person at all. I'm a motivated person, but not disciplined. And so for me, I think this kind of forces the hand of like, okay, I can go run 1 marathon randomly, but can I go do 3? And can I do the discipline of the training that requires daily commitment to it? And that I typically by default wouldn't do it. And so that's also why I've kind of gone public with it, as in like I've told people that like if I don't do this now, I totally wussed out, and like that's on me. And
We're
so
going to run this section just over and over and over again for like a year straight. If you don't do it.
Oh yeah. See, exactly. That's exactly what I mean.
Does success mean to you that you've signed up and you're going to do it, or does that mean you finish it? Because there's a chance you're not going to reach the finish line, right?
Success means that I show up the first day.
Show up to all right.
Well, because I know if I do, I'm going to finish it.
Yeah.
Now, if I have to walk it, so be it. But if it's literally getting to that day, saying I've trained what I needed to train or set out to train, and I'm there that day. At that point, it's less about the run. It's just like I did everything that it took to get there.
That's amazing.
Well, sounds amazing.
Sounds
I haven't done it yet. I was about to say it's easy to
committed on this podcast. So.
What will be amazing is after the February 6th when we're sitting on a
check
boat
in with
fishing.
us,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
There's a life metaphor there, though. My father-in-law, who is also a mentor of mine, I met him before I met my wife, actually. He had this phrase about showing up for practice. And he had also been a wrestler and then a wrestling coach and official and stuff like that in the state of Minnesota for a long time. But his idea of just showing up for practice is like, when people become great at something, the first thing they do is they show up for practice.
Yep.
Show up for practice every day. They may not be good at it. They may not have the right form, but they're showing up for practice every day. And eventually they'll get good at it.
Yeah.
But you can't be good at something and then not practice and stay good at it. So showing up is like a big part of it.
So I think there's also a conversation related to that around entrepreneurship, so I think, I don't know what percentage, but a vast majority of entrepreneurship is less around the high moments and it's showing up every day. And I like, we talk about, there's go be an alpha, go be a lion, go be all these, picturesque things. And I think most of entrepreneurship is being a cockroach. It's literally surviving the next day. And I think there's going to be seasons where that looks great. Everything you close your funding round, but after most of the time I've closed our funding round, it's like I want to take a nap, not pop a bottle of champagne or anything like that. But I think so much of it is surviving the next day and just consistently showing up. And I think that's it's weird because as a thrill seeker, right? And you're similar in the sense of living life in extremes and going through the extreme moments. I think so much of it is not that. In fact, majority of it's not that.
Yeah. I think people seek the wrong thing. Like exactly what you said. They seek the enthusiasm and the joy of the moment. Like you're thinking you're at an event and you're all motivated and inspired. Yeah. That's not what success is. Success is keeping that feeling during the mundane daily things. Success is built on a whole bunch of mundane patterns. And you just have to show up and do it again and again with great enthusiasm.
I've never debated somebody on this, but it always pisses me off when somebody's like, man, it must be nice to set your own schedule. When people talk about, and it's like, do you know, the greatest pain about that is I can go play a round of golf, but I can't not be thinking about what I have to do. Like if I'm playing around a golf, I mentally I'm like, I gotta be focused on something else, or I'm thinking about all the different things that I need to do. And that's not the pain, but that's some of the stuff that you don't see, that I think entrepreneurship creates this false narrative of like.
Social media certainly doesn't help with
destroys
that.
It. Yeah.
I mean, people put out only the good stuff. But really what I think is most interesting is the hard stuff. Those mundane tasks, doing them over and over again. Because that's like you said, where you get that limp in your leg. That's where it comes from.
That's exactly right. Because also I think people pursue happiness. And I think that's a little bit of a false narrative if they think about happiness as a lack of strife. A lot of times people feel happy like, oh, I'm at peace. Well, you're never going to be in shape if you're only pursuing lack of strife. You're never going to be successful financially if you don't discipline yourself. Actually, what creates success, if you will, is a bunch of things you don't want to do. It's dealing with resistance. It's like you have to embrace the fact that too hard for you, just right for me.
Yep.
Like why is it somebody who is like really fit? They're putting most of the time is struggle. And then with moments of looking in the mirror going like, I look amazing or whatever, like a bodybuilder would do. But most of it's pain and struggle. And it's not that you don't have to be a, what's the word? Like you don't have to feel like a martyr.
Yeah.
But like, you got to show up and deal with that stuff. That's part of life. It's like if you're a parent and like, I love everything about being a parent except changing the diaper and then feeding them and then cleaning up after them and like paying attention to them. Like that part I don't like. I like the other parts. What other parts?
Yeah.
It's about serving and about giving. And if you can't find joy in giving and joy in serving, using that analogy, you're never going to look back at that child's childhood with joy. And I think people think they're pursuing happiness and they're just trying to avoid pain.
Yeah,
and it's not a good way to do it.
And I also think, at least in the entrepreneurial metaphor, I definitely find it to be true that not that you get tampered by the highs, but I think some of the there's always kind of the next level. There's always another zero to add to it. And it's funny how there's not many excitements like your first car. When you get your first car, you clean that car for whatever reason more than you do anything else. And then your next car is a little bit less exciting. And it's not that life gets depressing or anything like that, but there's definitely something to be said about you could always be chasing that next thing and you're never going to find it no matter what it is.
Yeah, I can tell you it's just like with money. There's a certain amount of money you think, man, like when I was a kid, I remember thinking it'd be really great to make like a couple $1,000s a month.
Yeah.
And then it's like, man, 6 figures used to be a thing.
Yeah.
6 figures, it's like, and then 2 commas. Those numbers aren't that big. Like cars is a good example too. It's something that you want to do, but I can tell you this, like the more zeros you put behind buying a car, eventually it's just like, then it starts to become a burden.
Yeah.
Stuff becomes a burden.
I just bought a new car 4 days ago and I had no emotions to it. Whereas, I used to love flipping cars. I got so excited. This one, I literally walked in, impulsively bought it. I'm like, all right, great. It's another car. And it's like, it's a great car. It's a great car, but it's a little depressing. It's like, all right, that's like, if I knew, 10 years later, I was going to buy that and I was thrilled with it. I was like, oh, that's really cool. Now it's like,
see the arc of your life and what interests you, it changes
100%.
It's very scary. Isn't it?
It absolutely does. Like to me, the most exciting time financially was actually, how do we put this? When my wife and I got married, both of our net worths plummeted. So we both had debt, and I hate debt. I don't like owing money. And so to me, joy was just like being debt free.
Yeah.
So like the joy wasn't necessarily the things, it was the fact that I could pay cash for it.
Yeah.
If I could buy, cars, houses, whatever it was, and not have debt. And the financial planners say how stupid that was, and they're probably right. Yeah. But to your point, like different points in life, it's like, I just didn't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
I don't want a payment. I don't want this and that. It's not about, at that point, it's not about what it looks like to other people. It's actually what other people don't see. And I think you also have to know yourself, like what brings joy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes self-aware, which I think is a theme that we talk about a lot.
Yeah. I have a friend of mine who has, a lot of financial wherewithal, doesn't have anything on the outside that you would see as wealth. He doesn't like stuff. He's a minimalist. Lives in a little place, doesn't have very much stuff. And to him, that's just joy. He can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. Good for him.
Yeah.
Other people, they got to have bling. I have a friend of mine they have a safe in their basement that's awesome and is filled with these bags that are like ridiculously expensive bags. She's into it and she likes it. And like neither one of those is right or wrong. I love the fact that both of those different people, they're different and they can find joy in their own way, and both of them discipline themselves and work their tails off to get where they are. Got to have respect for that.
I used to feel that way about watches. I was like obsessed with young age, to get this beautiful fancy watch, and then I got the watch. Now look at me. I don't even wear a watch anymore. So it just goes to show, when you're young and you're stupid, you don't know.
Yeah.
You think what's important to you really matters, and then
and
something changes.
And we don't even need watches anymore.
No.
Right.
Kind of what you do it.
I check my phone.
I got my watch because I got tired of carrying my phone when I was running. So I got an Apple Watch because I don't have to do that. I can just run with it. And now I do dumb things like track my sleep with a watch. I mean, how dumb is that?
Yeah.
But I can, and then I can say, oh, how well did I sleep last night by looking at my watch? Or just like, I'm rested. I feel pretty good.
I don't need a watch to tell me that was a terrible night's sleep. I was rolling around the whole time.
It's so funny how much we
Yeah.
collect all this data that doesn't matter, and we look at it, and we're like all the apps that track everything.
The standing hours. It's like,
I mean, like
you know for a fact today you were physically active versus when you weren't. Like I know I sat and did nothing yesterday versus I'm tired today, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, that was a good day.
Well, the seasons change in life. I mean, like I was a Division I college athlete, and now my watch tells me when to stand up.
Like, it's the worst thing in the world when you're doing a workout and your watch is like, "Are you done?" It's like, oh, that's offensive.
Hey man, I'm still working here. That's funny.
Anyway, I think we've really gone off the rails here.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is where I wrap it up. Right? We've said it all. We've said too much. So I'm going to thank both of you for coming here. And listen, Matt, any last words? How do we get it? If we want to listen to your podcast, where do we find it?
The MattBaxterShow.com. You can find it there. I don't have any other social media anymore other than LinkedIn, but you can find it on the MattBaxterShow.com. But it's on Spotify, Apple Music, all the different platforms.
I looked at your LinkedIn, or not your LinkedIn, your Instagram. Need some help there.
Yeah.
Hey, can I ask a question on that one?
Sure.
Talk to me a little bit about like shutting off a lot of the social media noise in your life. Why did you do that, and what kind of results are you seeing from it?
So for me, it was nothing but distractions. So I don't have an Instagram anymore, no Facebook, no nothing. I had a decent amount of followers. Mm-hmm. It was like, one, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't like that. It was dumb to chase that. I definitely did. It worked. But to me, it's, my idle time. Now, when you first do it, you just quickly find something else, right? So if you delete Instagram, you go to TikTok. If you delete TikTok, you play chess, whatever it is, you're going to find something else. So I think I've started to force my hand on realizing when I'm seeking something because I'm bored versus seeking something because I am uncomfortable with my own downtime. So, I mean, for me, just Instagram and Facebook, there was nothing but, I don't really have the comparison syndrome as much on that stuff, but it was like, there's just nothing good that comes from that. I just don't need to be scrolling. It just doesn't help me. So that feeling I think is a good thing. And also like when I wake up in the morning, there was a period of time that I would roll over and be like, oh, I'm waiting for something. I don't know what it is, but I'm waiting for something on those platforms. Now that I don't have it, there was definitely that period of time. I don't have that feeling anymore.
That's great.
Cool. So yeah, it's just been a healthy, like, and also I found myself a ton. I'm posting so that I look impressive for other people. And I needed to remove that for myself. And it's not that I don't care about some of that still, but to me, I had to force myself not to do that.
I think that's a message a lot of people need to hear. I mean, it's so solid too, because getting the dopamine hits from what someone else did or said or whatever versus doing something in your life where you can get the same feel. I have friends in recovery that talk about how it's very similar from substance abuse, where people get to a point where they just have to have more and more of it. And social media, I think digital electronic addiction, very similar. Yeah. So a hat tip for you for taking control of just like your headspace so that you can control it.
Well, if you don't mind, there's so one of the things I've been thinking about is entrepreneurship is stressful. So there's points and just life is stressful, right? So there's points in the day where it's like, man, I'm like, I don't want to get out of bed. I'm stressed, whatever it is. And I've sort of been on a hunt of because there's definitely the long tail of like, okay, me training for this run over the next 6 months, I'm going to get healthier, right? Lose some weight, different things like that. But also like, what are things in the middle of the day that you only have 10, 15, 20 minutes to do that can be a positive impact in your life? So one, ice bath for sure, or ice shower, like immediately relieves everything. Like that for me, if I'm like stressed, things didn't go well, bad email, whatever it is, like jump in cold water, that for sure. And I hate how but that it does work. Secondly, like I've tried to do like 20 to 30 minute, even if it's a short run or walk, no phone, no nothing, don't talk on the phone. Like, cause previously I would try to talk on the phone during that, blah, blah, blah. But that getaway I think has been a huge help. And usually that time would have been filled on Instagram, TikTok, whatever, but trying to do things that are like quick wins that I know that are good for me, that has helped a ton.
That's smart.
Yeah.
I like it.
Working on it.